Hey everyone, we're back with another Shadowlands Dungeon trash guide. In these guides, we will look at all the trash focusing on their spells, abilities, buffs, and debuffs, and tips on how to deal with them. The trash mobs make up most of the dungeon run, and oftentimes they can be more dangerous than some bosses, so it's vital to know how to deal with all that they do, so we can all avoid dying to their abilities. Today we're going to go over all the trash in Plaguefall, but before we get into it, I want to thank you all for helping me get to 100 subs here on YouTube. My next goal is to get to 500 subs, so if you like these videos and they're helping out, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you know when the next video goes live. My goal is to continue to make videos that will help the community grow and learn. And I'm going to also be working on a set of videos where I go through each dungeon talking about how I tank them. I'll talk about my routes, how I think about and plan my CDs, what I try to watch out for, kiting, and more. So stay tuned for those videos coming soon, and again, thank you so much for all the support. I really appreciate it. And don't forget that all the information in this video is on a spreadsheet that I'll link below, and I'll be recapping the most impactful mobs and abilities at the end of the video. Alright, well let's get to talking about the trash in Plaguefall. At the beginning of the dungeon, you will run into a group containing a Fungal Mancer, Fungi Stormer, and a Mire Soldier. The Fungal Mancer will cast Blinding Fungus and Wonder Grow. Blinding Fungus will root all players after a 3-second cast, and Wonder Grow will increase the damage of all nearby enemies by 15%, and this can stack. Both abilities can be interrupted, and the Fungal Mancer can be stunned and otherwise CC'd. Both abilities are important to stop, as being rooted in place with the other abilities in this pack can cause some issues, and mobs doing extra damage is never good. The Fungi Stormer will cast one ability, Fungi Storm, which inflicts a moderate amount of nature damage to all players within range. This ability cannot be interrupted, but the Stormer can be stunned, incapacitated, and knocked back, so use your CC to stop this ability. Lastly, the Mire Soldier will simply cast Mighty Swing, which inflicts a moderate amount of physical damage to the highest threat target. All in all, these three are not too difficult when these abilities are shut down. The Decaying Flesh Giant looks scarier than it actually is. While in combat, it will periodically create toxic pools at player locations, which inflicts a moderate amount of nature damage to anyone caught within them, so just be on your toes to avoid the swirls. The giant will also cast Creepy Crawlers, which after a 1.5 second cast, will summon Creepy Crawlers to attack nearby players with Nibble, dealing a small amount of physical damage. I would recommend pulling this guy in with the first pack we talked about. If you do, stop as many Creeper Crawler casts as you can, but make sure you prioritize Wonder Grow and Blinding Fungus, so the mobs aren't buffed and you aren't rooted in the toxic pools. Creepy Crawlers can be annoying, but don't pose too much of an issue. The Pestilent Harvester will cast two interruptible abilities, Hurl Spores and Doom Shroom. Hurl Spores inflicts a small amount of nature damage to a random player and leaves behind a dot that deals a moderate amount of nature damage, and Doom Shroom summons a mushroom nearby that explodes for a large amount of nature damage to anyone caught within when it explodes. Plague Rocks will cast Blight Beak and Wing Buffet. Blight Beak inflicts a large amount of physical damage to the highest threat target and applies a stacking debuff that reduces maximum health by 10% for 20 seconds. This is not interruptible, but can be removed with a Disease Dispel. Wing Buffet inflicts a large amount of nature damage to anyone caught within the frontal cone and will also knock you back. Sidestep this ability to avoid the damage and the knockback. On the left side of this first area, you will find Fen Hornets, Plague Borers, and Hatchling Nests that summon Fen Hatchlings and Unstable Larvae. All of these can be stunned, incapacitated, and displaced. The Fen Hornets will just cast Fen Stinger at the highest threat target that inflicts a moderate amount of nature damage to the highest threat target, leaving behind a dot that deals a small amount of nature damage. This cannot be interrupted, but can be removed with a Poison Dispel. And Plague Borers cast Boar Flesh, inflicting a small amount of physical damage to a random target. The Hatchling Nest will alternate summoning 2 Fen Hatchlings and then 1 Unstable Larva. The Hatchlings cast Clinging Infestation on a random target that inflicts a small amount of nature damage every 1 second. This can stack, but is removed by jumping. Unstable Larva will only cast Larva Bomb, which deals a large amount of plague damage to all players caught within the 14-yard circle. Now when you enter the first boss area, you will find several Gushing Slimes. These will inflict a small amount of nature damage to all players within 10 yards every 1 second, and upon death explode, leaving behind a pool that inflicts a small amount of nature damage every 1 second. Next up, Plague Belchers will cast Belch Plague that inflicts a large amount of nature damage to anyone caught within the frontal cone. They will also cast Beckon Slime, which summons 3 nearby slimy morsels. When they reach the Plague Belcher, they will heal and buff it, increasing its size and damage done by 10%, and decreasing its attack speed by 10% for every morsel consumed. After defeating the first boss, you'll find the Blighted Spinebreaker. The Spinebreaker is not CCable and will cast Festering Belch and Jagged Spines. Festering Belch inflicts a large amount of nature damage to all players in a frontal cone and knocks them back. Jagged Spine causes spines to erupt under random players, inflicting a large amount of nature damage to anyone caught within the 5-yard circle and knocks them into the air. Two simple yet impactful abilities, so be quick on your feet to dodge them. Now upon death, the Spinebreaker will spawn 5 oozes that will begin casting Metamorphosis. If completed, they will transform into pestilent slimes, and you can avoid this by killing them before the cast goes off, or simply run over them to squish them in one hit. Now do note that running over them will cause you to take damage, so watch your health bar when doing so. Rigged Plague Boars cast Wretched Phlegm, which inflicts a moderate amount of nature damage to the highest threat target and reduces their movement speed by 65% for 6 seconds. This movement speed reduction can be quite dangerous, as the Plague Boars will drop Plague Bombs, which explode, inflicting a large amount of nature damage, and leaves behind a dot that deals moderate nature damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. This bomb will do damage to any unit caught within, so you can stun and otherwise keep enemies within this bomb while avoiding it yourself to deal massive damage to the mobs. Plague Binders cast 2 abilities, Pestilence Bolt and Gripping Infection. Pestilence Bolt inflicts a moderate amount of nature damage to the highest threat target, and Gripping Infection inflicts a small amount of nature damage every 2 seconds and roots them for 6 seconds. Both casts can be interrupted, and this unit can be CC'd, and if the Plague Binders are pulled with any rigged Plague Boars, make sure you stop Gripping Infection, as the tank can easily get one-shot by the explosion. Pestilent Slimes are the red slimes, and they have an aura that increases the haste of their allies by 25%. They will cast Viral Globs, which inflicts a small amount of nature damage to all players within range, and upon death will leave behind a puddle. While standing in the puddle, your haste is increased by 25%, but you also take a small amount of nature damage every 2 seconds. Rotmare Slimes are the yellow slimes, and they will often cast Corrosive Gunk. Now this interruptible 2-second cast inflicts a small amount of nature damage every 1 second for 15 seconds to players within 10 yards, and this dot can be removed with a Disease Dispel. The last colored slime is the purple Congealed Slime. This slime will buff all allies within 7 yards, causing them to take 75% reduced damage, so focus this guy down to remove the buff. This slime will also cast Withering Filth, which inflicts a large amount of nature damage to the highest threat target and reduces their haste by 45% for 30 seconds, and also to all players standing within 5 yards of the debuffed player. You cannot interrupt this spell, but you can dispel the magic effect, and tanks don't be caught off guard by the damage from this instant cast ability. All the mobs after this first boss area are easily dealt with either by the rigged Plague Boar's bombs or the unstable canisters placed around this area. When the canisters are destroyed, they will cast the same ability as the Plague Boar's bombs, so place the mobs within the explosion to deal extra damage. Rotting Slime Claws look harmless but can very easily take down a tank. These little guys only cast Corroded Claw on their highest threat target, which inflicts a large amount of nature damage and reduces all stats by 5% for 30 seconds, and this can stack. Use defensives, stuns, and otherwise lock these guys down before they deal too much damage. Slime Tentacles will cast Vile Spit when not engaged in melee combat. This will inflict a moderate amount of nature damage and leave behind a dot that deals additional nature damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. Tanks, make sure you stay in melee range to avoid this mechanic. Crushing Embrace will grab a random player in melee range and inflict a moderate amount of physical damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. And you can cancel this ability early by stunning the tentacle. While Viralax Blightweaver is alive, he will periodically summon rigged Plague Boars. These Plague Boars do not give count, but have access to all the abilities as a normal Plague Boar. Viralax will cast Pestilence Bolt, which we've seen before, Wasting Blight, and Obliterating Ooze. Wasting Blight inflicts a small amount of nature damage to random players and reduces their haste by 50% for 8 seconds. This cannot be interrupted, but can be removed with a Disease Dispel. Obliterating Ooze inflicts a large amount of nature damage to all players within 10 yards, so watch out for the big circle and get out before it explodes. The Defender of Many Eyes will periodically cast Bulwark of Maldraxxus. This will create a large shield that reduces all damage taken by 90% to allies within the shield. It is not interruptible, but you can cancel it with stuns, knockbacks, and incapacitating abilities. The Venomous Sniper will shoot at random players within 40 yards, dealing a moderate amount of nature damage. This ability does a fair amount of damage, so it's important for healers and DPS to note as well. This mob also does not move around much, so keep the other mobs stacked near it to cleave it down. Periodically, the Sniper will cast Call Venom Fang, which will summon a Venom Fang. This spell is interruptible, and the Sniper can also be CC'd. The Venom Fang will just attack the highest threat target, dealing extra nature damage with its strikes. It's not too big of a deal, so just cleave it down with the rest of the mobs if it gets summoned. Next, the Brood Ambusher will cast Ambush, Enveloping Web, and summon Stealthlings. Ambush leaps behind a random player, inflicting a small amount of physical damage to all players within 7 yards. Enveloping Web roots all enemies within the casting circle. Interrupt the cast or CC this mob to stop the cast. Lastly, Stealthlings is an uninterruptible but stunnable cast that will summon 8 Stealthlings nearby. These Stealthlings are hidden until damaged, and when summoned will begin to cast Ambush. Once the cast completes, they will all ambush a single player, each dealing a moderate amount of damage. On higher keys, this will definitely one-shot the player, so CC them and kill them before they get the cast off, or use a big defensive in hopes to survive the incoming damage. Once you drop down to the last boss area, you'll find the last 2 mob types of the dungeon. Plaguebound Devoted only melee their highest threat target, but their melees hurt. It does take them a few seconds to activate, so tanks get in there and create as much threat as you can, and then just kite until they're dead. Within each pack of Devoted, there will be one Devoted buffed with Oozing Carcass. This buff increases movement speed by 500, reduces all damage taken by 30%, and grants immunity to all CC. While near other mobs, it will also cause them to take 30% reduced AoE damage. Once the tanks have gained threat and all the Devoted have activated, take the buffed mob away from the pack so they can be easily dispatched. Lastly, we have Ichor Bileflesh. This mob will stand at range and spam cast Pestilent Bolt on the highest threat target, and after a short period will use Ghost Step to teleport to one of the other mob packs in the room. Ichor will also continue to buff Devoted mobs with Oozing Carcass, so get the mobs down before too many gain this buff. Well, I know there is a lot to go through, so let's recap some of the most impactful mobs and abilities in this dungeon. Make sure you utilize the bombs from the rigged plague boars and unstable canisters, but tanks beware of the wretched phlegm from the plague boars and gripping infection from the plague binder, so you are not slowed or rooted in the blast. The purple slimes reduce nearby allies' damage taken by 75%, so target them first. Rotting slime claws look harmless but can easily take down a tank, so be prepared for a lot of damage when pulling these mobs. And lastly, the plague-bound Devoted in the last room deal a lot of damage, so gain aggro and then kite while the DPS finish them off. If you're able to watch out for these abilities and lock down a fair amount of the rest, you should find this dungeon challenging yet completable. I hope all of this information helped you understand how to complete this dungeon, and if you have any other ideas, tips, or tricks that maybe I didn't mention, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching these videos and supporting this channel. I want to continue helping our community, and I would very much appreciate your help in getting this channel to my next goal of 500 subs. Again, thank you so much for getting me to the 100 sub mark. I really appreciate it. I also stream on Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday morning and Friday nights, so stop by and hang out. But until then, we'll see you next time, everyone.